75% of subjects gave an answer they could see with their own eyes was wrong. The line they selected was visibly shorter, not ambiguously shorter, not close. Shorter in a way that any functioning visual cortex could register in under a second. They could see it. They still said it. There is no dramatic way to explain what that number means. That is the point. In 1951, a psychologist named Solomon Asch designed one of the most structurally simple experiments in the history of behavioral science. The task required no expertise, no calculation, no inference. A subject was shown a target line and then shown 3 comparison lines. One of the 3 matched the target exactly. The other 2 did not match. Not subtly, not in a way that required careful measurement, but obviously the kind of obvious that requires no deliberation. Asch wanted to measure something he considered nearly redundant: whether people would give a correct answer to an unambiguous question when surrounded by people giving an incorrect one. He was testing for independence. He expected to find it. His underlying assumption was reasonable, that social pressure operates primarily on opinion, on interpretation, on the grey zones of judgment, but physical perception, he believed, was a different category. Solid, anchored. He was designing an experiment to measure a flaw. What he found instead was the ceiling. Each real subject was placed in a room with several other individuals who appeared to be fellow participants. They were not. They were confederates, trained actors operating under instruction. On 12 critical trials, every confederate in the room gave the same wrong answer, unanimously, without hesitation. And then it was the real subject's turn. 75% conformed at least once across those 12 trials. Across all critical trials combined, 37% of answers given by real subjects matched the confederates rather than reality. Only 25% of participants never conformed at all. 1 in 4 resisted the pattern across the entire experiment. When subjects completed the same visual task in isolation, the error rate fell below 1%. Read that again at a slower pace. Below 1% in solitude, 37% in a group. The visual information was identical in both conditions. The lines did not change. What changed was the presence of other humans producing a unanimous wrong answer. That variable alone moved human accuracy from effectively perfect to effectively unreliable. This is where the science becomes structurally strange. For decades, the dominant interpretation of Asch's results was cognitive override, the idea that subjects knew the correct answer, experienced social discomfort, and then consciously chose to suppress what they knew in order to avoid social friction. A rational, if cowardly, calculation. It was framed as a decision, a person choosing to lie in the interest of social cohesion. That interpretation was wrong. In 2005, neuroscientist Gregory Burns and his colleagues at Emory University replicated a version of the Asch paradigm using functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI scanning, that allowed researchers to observe which regions of the brain were active during conformity events. If the cognitive override model were correct, you would expect to see conformity light up the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with deliberate decision-making, social reasoning, and conflict resolution. You would expect to see evidence of a battle, a conscious suppression, an override. That is not what the imaging showed. When subjects conformed to the group's incorrect answer, increased activity appeared in the regions associated with spatial perception and mental rotation, the areas involved in the actual visual processing of the lines, not the regions responsible for choosing, the regions responsible for seeing. The brain was not registering a social dilemma and electing to misreport the answer. It was updating the perception itself. The group consensus was functioning as a sensory input, weighted heavily enough to alter the upstream assembly of what the subject actually experienced as visual reality. The ego never knew it happened. There was no moment of internal dishonesty to detect. The information entered before consciousness had access to it. Social agreement was not a social pressure applied to a finished perception. It was a variable introduced into the perceptual construction process, recalibrating what got built. The subjects who conformed were not lying. They were, in the most precise neurological sense, perceiving differently. This is how the organism is built. It is not a flaw introduced by weakness of character. It is an optimization strategy, one that likely served survival well in environments where the group's reading of ambiguous information was more reliable than the individual's. The problem is that the brain has not installed a reliable filter for distinguishing between genuinely ambiguous environments and unambiguous ones. It extends the same weighting mechanism regardless. You have been using this mechanism today. Somewhere in the last week, you received feedback on your work from someone in a position of authority. Before that feedback arrived, you had a working estimate of your own performance quality. After the feedback, your memory of that estimate quietly shifted. Not because new evidence emerged, because the room spoke. Your manager's frame was processed not as an opinion to be weighed against your own, but as perceptual data about what had actually occurred. There is a symptom you have been monitoring, something physical, something mild enough to dismiss. You downgraded its severity not because it improved, but because the people around you registered no concern. Their absence of alarm was processed as clinical information. You updated your read of your own body against their unconcerned behavior. There is a political or social position you held 3 years ago with more firmness than you hold it now. You were not argued out of it. No evidence arrived that shifted your reasoning, but you spent time in rooms where no one shared it, where its absence in the ambient consensus slowly recalibrated what felt intuitively true. The position didn't lose the argument, it lost the room. A single dissenter collapses the mechanism dramatically. Asch demonstrated this with precision. Introducing just one confederate who broke from the group reduced conformity rates by more than 2/3. 1. A single human producing a different answer was sufficient to restore independence to the rest. But you are rarely the dissenter. The mechanism typically operates below the threshold of experienced choice. It does not feel like conforming, it feels like thinking. The costs of this architecture are not theoretical. In group medical decision-making settings, diagnostic accuracy declines when senior clinicians anchor early and team members update toward consensus rather than independent assessment. Jury deliberation research consistently shows that initial majority positions predict final verdicts at rates that exceed what the evidence alone would predict, meaning verdicts are being shaped partly by the social geometry of the room. Asset bubbles are not primarily the product of greed or ignorance. They are the product of perceptual recalibration at scale. The price seems correct because every observable behavior in the environment confirms that it is, until the environment's consensus is wrong, and then everyone's perception is wrong together, simultaneously. Relationships accumulate a shared narrative of who each person is. That narrative is maintained by social repetition. Over years, the story you tell each other about yourself becomes the story you tell yourself, and you lose access to whatever existed before the room agreed on its version. Careers are assembled the same way. The path that feels chosen is often the path that faced the least ambient resistance, because the options that existed but went unendorsed never felt quite real enough to select. The opinions you hold that you have never tested in solitude, you do not know which of those are yours. While watching this, you are in a room. This channel, this comment section, this algorithmic recommendation that surfaced this video among others, these are social environments with consensus signals. And as you process the content, some part of your perceptual architecture was already sampling the room's position on whether what you were hearing felt true. Not just whether it was interesting, whether it matched what the room seemed to believe. That process was running the entire time. It is still running now. There is no version of this sentence you received in isolation. You are already adjusting, not your posture, your perception.